The Ashford estate gleamed beneath a veil of winter moonlight, its towering windows spilling rivers of gold across the frost-covered grounds. From a distance it appeared to be a place untouched by sorrow, a monument to wealth, lineage, and certainty. Carriages rolled through the iron gates in steady procession, carrying ladies draped in silk and gentlemen adorned with polished metals. Laughter drifted through the cold air like music. To the world, the estate represented everything noble society admired. Yet behind those glowing windows lived a young woman whom nobody admired at all. Lady Eleanor Ashford moved through the grand corridors with the silence of a ghost. Though she possessed the blood of the Ashford family, she carried none of its privileges. Her parents had died when she was 14, leaving her orphaned and dependent upon relatives who viewed her less as family and more as an inconvenient obligation. 4 years had passed since that loss, and every day had taught her the same lesson. A person could belong to a great house and still be utterly alone within it. On the evening of the winter charity banquet, servants hurried through the mansion carrying trays of crystal glasses and silver dishes. Candles flickered beneath enormous chandeliers, scattering diamonds of light across marble floors. Fresh roses decorated every table. Guests arrived from across the county, eager to dine beneath the Ashford roof and exchange gossip among the elite. Eleanor spent the afternoon helping arrange flowers no one would credit her for placing. When she finally climbed the servants' staircase to prepare for the banquet, she paused before a small mirror in her modest room. The reflection staring back at her was lovely despite exhaustion. Soft chestnut hair framed delicate features. Gentle gray eyes held an intelligence she rarely revealed. Her gown, however, betrayed her position. While the ladies downstairs would appear in velvet and satin, Eleanor wore a faded dress that had already survived 3 seasons. She smoothed the fabric with careful fingers. "At least it is clean," she whispered to herself. The words sounded brave. They did not feel brave. Downstairs, the grand dining hall shimmered with life. A string quartet performed near the fireplace while guests gathered beneath crystal light. Conversations flowed as freely as champagne. Eleanor entered quietly through a side door and immediately sensed familiar eyes assessing her. Some guests looked away. Others stared openly. A few exchanged amused smiles. She had become a subject of entertainment among certain circles. The unfortunate niece. The poor relation. The girl who lived in luxury yet possessed nothing. At the head of the room stood her aunt, Lady Beatrice Ashford, whose smile never reached her eyes. "There you are," Lady Beatrice said coolly. "Try not to draw attention to yourself this evening." Eleanor lowered her gaze. "Of course, Aunt. The guests are here to enjoy themselves, not to be reminded of misfortune." The remark struck with practiced precision. Eleanor merely nodded. Years earlier she might have protested. Experience had taught her otherwise. The banquet commenced shortly after sunset. Noble families took their places around an enormous table decorated with silver candelabras and winter flowers. Servants presented roasted pheasant, honey-glazed vegetables, warm bread, and delicate pastries. Laughter echoed beneath painted ceilings. Eleanor waited beside the wall. No place had been prepared for her. Though she carried the title of lady, she was not invited to sit among the guests. The omission was deliberate. She remained standing while course after course appeared before the company. Hours passed. Her stomach tightened with hunger, yet she endured it quietly. More than hunger, she feared becoming a spectacle. Across the room, whispers drifted toward her. "Such a pity. They say she has no dowry. I heard the family wishes to send her away. One cannot keep burdens forever." Each comment landed softly like snowflakes. Yet enough snow could bury a person alive. Eleanor fixed her eyes upon a distant window and pretended not to hear. The music continued. The candles burned lower. The guests feasted. And still no one offered her a seat. When the final course ended, conversation shifted toward dancing and cards. Chairs scraped across polished floors as guests departed for adjoining rooms. Servants began clearing abandoned plates from the table. Only then did Eleanor move. Carefully, ensuring no one noticed, she approached a sideboard where leftovers had been collected. A half piece of bread remained untouched. Beside it sat fragments of roasted meat and a small portion of vegetables. She gathered them onto a plain plate. The food was cold. It did not matter. She carried the plate toward a shadowed corner beyond the glow of the chandeliers and sat alone. Around her, society celebrated. Nearby, glasses clinked. Laughter rose. Music played. Yet in that small corner of the magnificent hall, Eleanor ate the discarded remnants of a feast that should have included her. For several minutes no one paid attention. Then, as she lowered her eyes to the plate, A silence she could not explain settled over her thoughts. Someone was watching. Across the room stood the Duke, and for the first time that evening, his gaze was fixed entirely on her. The sounds of celebration seemed to fade beneath the weight of the Duke's attention. Eleanor lowered her eyes at once, uncertain whether she had committed some fresh offense merely by being seen. Around her, noble guests drifted toward the ballroom, their laughter mingling with the distant strains of a waltz. Yet the Duke remained where he stood, watching her with an expression she could not decipher. Duke Alexander Blackwell was not a man easily ignored. Tall, composed, and respected throughout England, he possessed the kind of authority that required no announcement. Conversations often softened when he entered a room. Even those who envied him acknowledged his integrity. Now he crossed the hall directly toward Eleanor. She rose immediately. "Your Grace," she said quietly. His gaze settled briefly upon the cold plate in her hands before returning to her face. "Have you dined?" The question caught her unprepared. "Yes, Your Grace." A faint glance toward the leftovers revealed that he knew she was lying. Yet he spared her further embarrassment. For that alone she felt unexpectedly grateful. As Eleanor lowered her hand, the Duke's attention shifted. His eyes narrowed slightly. Something was written across her palm. Not decorative ink. Words. Small. Uneven. Desperate. Before she could close her fingers, he had read them. "Please do not send me away." For a moment, neither spoke. The music continued in the distance, oblivious to the silence between them. Then Eleanor quickly folded her hand into a fist. Color drained from her face. She had forgotten the writing remained there. Earlier that morning, she had scribbled the words upon her skin after overhearing a conversation between her aunt and a solicitor. They had spoken of sending her to a remote institution in the countryside, somewhere she would no longer burden the family. The message on her hand had been a private reminder of the fears she dared not voice aloud. Now the Duke had seen it. "What does that mean?" he asked gently. She looked away. "It means nothing, Your Grace." His expression suggested otherwise. Yet he merely inclined his head. "If you ever find yourself needing assistance, Lady Eleanor, I hope you will remember that not every door is closed to you." The words lingered long after he departed. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to her as though she mattered. The following morning, snow covered the estate gardens in a blanket of white. Eleanor spent the early hours arranging books in a neglected sitting room, grateful for the quiet. As she worked, a servant entered carrying a parcel. "For you, my lady." Eleanor blinked. "For me?" The servant nodded. Once alone, she carefully untied the ribbon. Inside lay a beautifully bound volume of poetry. No note accompanied it. Yet she knew immediately who had sent it. The Duke had noticed during previous gatherings that she often paused near bookshelves. It was such a small observation, yet no one else had ever paid enough attention to make it. She opened the cover and traced her fingertips across the embossed lettering. A strange warmth settled within her chest. Not happiness exactly. Oh. Days passed. Then another gift arrived. A bouquet of winter roses. Several days later came a warm wool cloak, elegant but practical against the cold. None included messages. None required acknowledgement. Yet each carried the same silent assurance. "You're seen." For Eleanor, those gifts became treasures. For society, they became entertainment. Rumors spread with astonishing speed. Ladies whispered during afternoon calls. Gentlemen exchanged amused observations over brandy. Why was the Duke showing such interest in a penniless niece? Why did gifts continue appearing? What hidden motive existed beneath such generosity? The speculation grew with every passing day. Eleanor became increasingly uncomfortable. The kindness that had briefly brightened her world now threatened to make her the center of unwanted attention. One afternoon she entered a drawing room and heard conversations cease abruptly. Several women exchanged meaningful looks. Another concealed a smile behind her fan. Eleanor understood immediately. They were discussing her. Again. The realization stung more than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, Lady Beatrice's patience began to erode. The older woman had tolerated Eleanor's existence because she believed her powerless. Now circumstances were changing. At dinner one evening, Lady Beatrice addressed her before assembled guests. "You seem to attract remarkable attention lately." The room fell quiet. Eleanor placed down her fork. "I do not understand." "Oh, I believe you do." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward with interest. Lady Beatrice smiled thinly. "It is astonishing how quickly some women learn to inspire sympathy." The accusation hung heavily in the air. Eleanor's face burned. I have done nothing improper. No. Lady Beatrice lifted an eyebrow. Then perhaps you can explain why one of England's most distinguished gentlemen suddenly concerns himself with your welfare. The cruelty of the question was deliberate. Eleanor struggled to answer. She knew any defense would only deepen the humiliation. Before she could speak, another voice interrupted. Perhaps because compassion remains a virtue. Every head turned. The Duke stood near the doorway. Silence swept through the room. Lady Beatrice's smile faltered. Alexander entered with calm confidence. His gaze never left hers. Surely we have not reached the point where kindness requires justification. No one responded. No one dared. For the first time, Eleanor witnessed someone challenge her aunt openly. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, gossip erupted throughout the estate. By morning, servants repeated embellished versions of the confrontation. By afternoon, neighboring families discussed it. The scandal had become impossible to contain. Yet amid the whispers and speculation, something within Eleanor had changed. She no longer felt entirely abandoned. Someone stood between her and the cruelty she had endured for years. Someone believed she deserved better. That belief frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. Several nights later, unable to sleep, the Duke sat alone in his study reviewing estate correspondence. A lingering suspicion had begun troubling him. Too many details surrounding Eleanor failed to align. Too many financial records seemed strangely absent. Acting on instinct, he requested access to old family documents. Hours passed beneath the glow of a single lamp. Then, buried within forgotten ledgers and legal papers, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Eleanor had not been impoverished by circumstance. For years, money intended for her inheritance had vanished. And every document pointed toward someone inside the Ashford household. Rain arrived before sunset, drumming steadily against the tall windows of Ashford Estate and wrapping the countryside in a curtain of silver mist. The storm transformed the world beyond the glass into shifting shadows and blurred silhouettes, as though nature itself wished to conceal secrets waiting to be uncovered. Inside the mansion, however, another storm had already begun. Eleanor spent the evening alone in a small sitting room, attempting to concentrate on a book she had read 3 times without absorbing a single sentence. The growing whispers throughout the estate had made every hallway feel narrower, every glance more scrutinizing. She knew society was discussing her. Worse, she knew her aunt's resentment deepened with each passing day. A knock sounded at the door. She looked up. A servant stood waiting. "His Grace requests your presence in the library, my lady." Her pulse stumbled. The Duke? Immediately. Once the servant departed, Eleanor remained motionless for several moments. The request was unexpected. Their recent interactions had been brief and careful, constrained by propriety and observation. A private meeting carried risks neither of them could ignore. Yet something in the servant's tone suggested urgency. Drawing a steadying breath, she rose. The corridors seemed unusually quiet as she crossed the estate. Candlelight flickered along paneled walls, casting golden reflections upon polished wood. Outside, thunder rolled across distant hills. By the time she reached the library doors, her nerves had become impossible to ignore. She hesitated, then entered. The library glowed with warmth. A fire crackled within the hearth, filling the room with amber light and dancing shadows. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stretched toward the ceiling. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The atmosphere felt removed from the rest of the estate, like a refuge hidden within a hostile world. Duke Alexander stood beside a large desk. Several documents lay spread before him. When he looked up, his expression was serious. "Thank you for coming." Eleanor inclined her head. "You wished to see me, Your Grace?" "I did." His voice carried unusual gravity. He gestured toward a chair near the fire. "Please sit." She obeyed, uncertainty tightening within her chest. For several moments he seemed to search for the proper words. Then he placed a collection of papers upon the table between them. "I discovered something concerning your inheritance." Eleanor stared. "My inheritance?" "Yes." The phrase felt almost foreign. No one had spoken of her inheritance in years. Alexander opened one document. "After your parents passed away, substantial funds were placed in trust for your future." Confusion crossed her features. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake." His gaze remained steady. "The money existed." A silence followed. Eleanor's hands tightened together. "If it existed, where did it go?" The Duke exhaled slowly. "That is precisely the question." One by one, he explained the inconsistencies hidden within old financial records. Withdrawals, transfers, missing accounts, signatures appearing where they should not have appeared. Years of manipulation concealed beneath respectable appearances. As understanding dawned, Eleanor felt as though the room tilted beneath her. All those years. The worn dresses, the humiliations, the dependence, the constant reminders that she was a burden. None of it had been necessary. Someone had stolen the future intended for her. Tears threatened unexpectedly. She turned away. I always believed my parents left nothing. Alexander's expression softened. They did not leave you nothing. The gentleness in his voice nearly broke her composure. For years she had endured hardship believing it unavoidable. Learning the truth felt both liberating and devastating. The fire crackled softly. Rain continued falling beyond the windows. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Alexander asked a question no one had ever asked before. How have you endured this? The simplicity of it unraveled something inside her. No accusations. No judgment. Only genuine concern. Eleanor stared into the flames. At first her answers came quietly. Then they kept coming. She spoke of loneliness. Of arriving at the estate after her parents' funeral and immediately sensing she was unwanted. She spoke of being excluded from family gatherings. Of hearing herself discussed as though she were an inconvenience rather than a person. Of birthdays forgotten. Of promises broken. Of countless dinners spent watching others belong somewhere she never truly belonged. The words emerged slowly, carrying years of silence with them. Alexander listened without interruption. As the hours passed, Eleanor found herself revealing wounds she had hidden even from herself. When people are disappointed often. Enough, she said softly, they eventually stop expecting kindness. The confession lingered between them. Alexander's jaw tightened. No anger appeared in his expression. Only sorrow. And something deeper. Something she could not quite name. The firelight illuminated his features as he studied her. You deserved better. The statement struck her with unexpected force. Not because it was extraordinary. Because no one had ever said it. Her eyes lowered. I stopped believing that years ago. Outside, lightning briefly illuminated the rain-streaked windows. Inside, silence settled once more. Yet it felt different now. Not empty. Comfortable. Safe. Alexander moved closer to the hearth. For a moment he seemed less like a duke and more like a man burdened by what he had learned. Finally he spoke. Miss Ashford, the world may overlook a star when clouds gather, but that does not lessen its light. The words settled gently around her. No compliment she had ever received compared to them. Because he was not praising her appearance. He was defending her worth. Something fragile stirred within her chest. Hope. Dangerous hope. The kind she had spent years trying to extinguish. She looked at him across the firelight. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what life might have been if someone like him had entered her world sooner. The realization frightened her. Not because she distrusted him. Because she was beginning not to. Their eyes met. Neither looked away immediately. The room seemed smaller. The silence warmer. For a brief moment, society's rules, expectations, and barriers faded into the background. Only two lonely people remained. Then reality returned. Eleanor lowered her gaze first. The spell broke. Yet something had changed. Neither could deny it. Hours later, she rose to leave. The storm had weakened outside. The fire burned lower. At the doorway she paused. Thank you, she said quietly. Alexander stepped forward. You need never thank me for telling the truth. Emotion tightened her throat. Unable to trust herself to speak further, she nodded and departed. The library door closed softly behind her. Alexander remained standing beside the dying fire. His thoughts lingered upon everything she had revealed. Yet one troubling detail refused to leave his mind. The stolen inheritance explained much. But not everything. Certain records hinted at plans extending beyond financial theft. Plans still unfolding. The following morning, fresh information arrived from a trusted solicitor in London. After reading the letter, Alexander's expression darkened. The conspiracy against Eleanor had not ended. According to newly uncovered correspondence, Lady Beatrice intended to remove Eleanor from Ashford Estate within days. And if she succeeded, Eleanor would disappear before learning the full truth of what had been stolen from her. The days that followed passed beneath a cloud of tension so thick it seemed to settle over Ashford Estate like an approaching storm. Eleanor sensed the change immediately. Servants fell silent when she entered rooms. Her aunt's smiles became sharper. Closed doors concealed hurried conversations that ceased the moment footsteps approached. Though she did not yet know the details of the threat against her, she felt its presence everywhere. Duke Alexander knew time was running short. The documents delivered from London had confirmed his fears. Lady Beatrice had already arranged for Eleanor's removal to a remote institution under the pretense of protecting the family's reputation. Once Eleanor disappeared, recovering her inheritance would become infinitely more difficult. Worse, the truth could be buried forever. Alexander refused to allow that to happen. Fortunately, opportunity arrived in the form of the Ashford Winter Ball. The annual event was among the most anticipated gatherings of the season. Nobles from across the county would attend. Influential families, respected businessmen, magistrates, and members of parliament would all be present beneath one roof. It would be impossible to conceal the truth once the right audience witnessed it. The evening arrived beneath a sky crowded with stars. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated the estate grounds. Carriages rolled endlessly along the circular drive. Music drifted from open windows. Inside, crystal chandeliers transformed the ballroom into a sea of golden light. Silk gowns shimmered like moving jewels. Diamonds sparkled at elegant throats. Gentlemen in formal black coats moved through the crowd with practiced sophistication. For years Eleanor had observed such occasions from the shadows. Tonight was different. She stood before a mirror in her room, scarcely recognizing the woman staring back. Using funds Alexander had quietly secured from the recovered inheritance accounts, a proper gown had been commissioned for her. The dress flowed in soft silver blue silk, elegant without excess. Tiny pearls decorated the sleeves. Her chestnut hair was arranged gracefully, and for the first time in years she looked not like an unwanted dependent but like the noble woman she had always been. Emotion tightened her throat. No expensive fabric could erase the pain of the past. Yet standing there, she felt something she had nearly forgotten. Dignity. When she entered the ballroom, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Several guests blinked in surprise. Others openly stared. The same people who once dismissed her now struggled to hide their astonishment. Whispers spread rapidly through the crowd. Is that Lady Eleanor? She looks extraordinary. I scarcely recognized her. Eleanor heard the comments but kept her composure. For once, she did not lower her eyes. Across the room, Alexander watched her arrival. The sight stole his breath. Not because of the gown. Not because of her beauty. Because she finally carried herself as someone beginning to believe she deserved to exist without apology. Their eyes met. A faint smile appeared between them. Neither needed words. The evening progressed beneath an undercurrent of anticipation. Music filled the ballroom while couples danced beneath the chandeliers. Yet Alexander's attention remained fixed on a single objective: the truth. Lady Beatrice sensed danger as well. Her confidence had begun to crack. She watched Alexander carefully, aware that something was unfolding beyond her control. Near midnight the moment arrived. A respected solicitor from London entered the ballroom carrying a leather document case. Several influential guests immediately recognized him. Conversations slowed. Alexander stepped forward. The room gradually quieted. Curiosity spread among the assembled guests. Lady Beatrice's face paled. Eleanor, Alexander said calmly, there is something you deserve to hear before every person gathered here. Confusion swept through the crowd. The solicitor opened the case. Documents emerged. Ledgers. Legal records. Bank statements. Years of evidence. Alexander's voice carried clearly across the ballroom. For too long, an injustice has remained hidden within this household. Silence deepened. Eleanor stood frozen. She knew what was coming. Yet hearing it spoken publicly felt overwhelming. The solicitor began presenting the facts. One document after another. One transaction after another. Funds entrusted to Eleanor's future had been systematically diverted. Accounts manipulated. Records altered. Signatures forged. Gasps rippled through the room. Faces turned toward Lady Beatrice. Shock transformed into outrage. The evidence was undeniable. Every attempt to portray Eleanor as a burden collapsed beneath the weight of the truth. She had never been impoverished. She had been robbed. Lady Beatrice rose abruptly. This is absurd. Her voice trembled. A misunderstanding. But no one believed her. Not anymore. Years of carefully maintained respectability disintegrated before hundreds of witnesses. The room that once admired her now regarded her with suspicion. The transformation was swift and merciless. For Eleanor, however, something far more important was occurring. For the first time in years, people were looking at her and seeing the truth. Not gossip. Not pity. Not ridicule. Truth. Tears threatened her composure. She fought them back. Alexander stepped beside her. His presence felt steady as stone. Protective. Certain. The orchestra had fallen silent. Every eye remained fixed upon them. Then Alexander spoke once more. His voice carried neither anger nor triumph. Only conviction. A lady's worth is not measured by the cruelty she endures, but by the grace with which she survives it. The words settled over the ballroom like a benediction. No one spoke. No one moved. Many lowered their eyes in shame. Others looked at Eleanor with newfound respect. Years of humiliation seemed to loosen their grip upon her heart. Not vanish. Never vanish entirely. But loosen. For the first time since her parents died, she felt seen. Truly seen. Then Alexander extended his hand. The gesture was simple. Yet everyone understood its meaning. Eleanor stared at his offered hand for several seconds. Then she placed her own within it. A murmur swept through the crowd. Alexander led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra slowly resumed playing. Couples remained motionless along the edges of the room. No one wished to interrupt the moment. Together they moved across the polished floor beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. The dance felt strangely intimate despite the hundreds of witnesses surrounding them. Neither spoke much. Neither needed to. Everything important existed within the quiet understanding growing between them. When the music ended, applause erupted unexpectedly. Not polite applause. Genuine applause. For Eleanor. Emotion flooded her chest. She had spent years believing she would always be invisible. Now the room that once rejected her stood in acknowledgement. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Alexander leaned closer. "There is something I must tell you." Her heart quickened. His expression held unusual seriousness. Not the determination of a man exposing a scandal. Something more personal. Something far more dangerous. He offered his arm. "Will you walk with me?" Beneath the fading music and the glow of midnight chandeliers, Eleanor nodded. And together they left the ballroom, stepping toward a conversation that would change both of their lives forever. The music of the ballroom faded behind them as Eleanor and Alexander stepped through a pair of glass doors leading into the estate gardens. Cool midnight air greeted them, carrying the faint fragrance of winter roses and damp earth. Above, the moon hung like polished silver in a sky scattered with stars. The estate grounds, so often a place of solitude for Eleanor, seemed transformed beneath the soft glow of lanterns and moonlight. For several moments neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt significant. The events of the evening still echoed through Eleanor's thoughts. The truth had finally emerged. Years of deception had been exposed before society itself. The burden she had carried for so long no longer belonged solely to her. Yet despite everything that had happened, Alexander's words inside the ballroom remained foremost in her mind. "There is something I must tell you." They walked slowly along a gravel path bordered by sleeping rose bushes. At last Eleanor broke the silence. "You have changed my life." Alexander glanced toward her. "No. The truth changed your life. You brought it into the light." His expression softened. "And you found the courage to face it." Eleanor lowered her gaze. The compliment touched her more deeply than she wished to reveal. For years she had measured herself through the opinions of others. Through criticism. Through rejection. Through the quiet humiliation of being treated as less than she was. Now those old judgments seemed strangely distant. Not gone, but losing their power. A gentle breeze stirred the loose strands of hair framing her face. Alexander stopped walking. Eleanor halted beside him. The garden stretched around them in silver stillness. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared in his expression. Not fear. Vulnerability. It surprised her. Powerful men rarely allowed themselves such honesty. "Before I met you," he said quietly, "I believed I understood loneliness." She looked up. His gaze remained fixed upon the moonlit gardens. "My position often places distance between myself and others. People see titles, estates, responsibilities. Very few see the person beneath them." His voice carried no bitterness. Only truth. "I accepted that long ago." Eleanor listened carefully. The confession felt personal. Important. Then his eyes met hers. "And then I noticed a young woman sitting alone in a corner of a crowded room." Emotion tightened her chest. The memory returned instantly. The cold leftovers. The humiliation. The feeling of invisibility. Alexander continued. "Everyone else looked past you." His voice grew softer. "But I could not." The words settled between them. Simple. sincere, powerful. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She sensed where the conversation was leading. Part of her longed to hear it. Another part feared it. Hope had betrayed her too many times. Alexander stepped closer. Not enough to break propriety. Just enough to erase some of the distance between them. At first, I admired your resilience. His gaze never left hers. Then I admired your kindness. The garden seemed to grow quieter. Even the wind appeared to pause. And eventually, he said, admiration became affection. Eleanor felt her breath catch. The words she had secretly dreamed of hearing now stood before her, undeniable. Yet fear remained. Fear born from years of disappointment. Fear that happiness belonged to other people, not her. She lowered her eyes. You should not say such things. Why? His voice was gentle. Because they are dangerous. A faint smile touched his lips. The truth often is. Eleanor's composure began to crack. You know what I am. The pain beneath the statement was unmistakable. I am the girl people pitied. No. Alexander's response came immediately. You are the woman who survived. Tears shimmered within her eyes. She turned away. For years she had hidden her wounds behind dignity and silence. Now those defenses felt fragile. What if I am not enough? She whispered. The question escaped before she could stop it. A lifetime of hurt lived within those words. Alexander moved beside her. Not touching. Simply present. You have spent years listening to voices that diminished your worth. His tone remained calm. Allow me to offer another. Slowly, Eleanor looked toward him. The sincerity in his eyes was impossible to doubt. You are intelligent. A tear slipped down her cheek. You are compassionate. Another followed. You are courageous. The emotion she had contained for years began to break free. And you are more than enough. Eleanor closed her eyes. For so long she had waited to hear someone say those words. Not because they pitied her. Not because they wished to rescue her. Because they genuinely believed them. When she opened her eyes again, Alexander reached into his coat pocket. A folded piece of paper appeared in his hand. Carefully he opened it. Eleanor immediately recognized the familiar handwriting. Her breath caught. It was the message. The words he had seen written on her hand the night of the banquet. Please do not send me away. Alexander looked down at the paper briefly. Then back at her. I copied these words because I could not forget them. Emotion filled his voice. They reminded me how easily good people can be overlooked. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. But they also reminded me of something else. Eleanor waited. His gaze softened. They reminded me that I never wanted you to leave. Tears flowed freely now. Not from sadness. From relief. From joy. From the overwhelming realization that she was finally loved exactly as she was. Alexander folded the paper carefully. Then, with unmistakable purpose, he knelt before her. The world seemed to stop. Moonlight illuminated the gravel path. The roses stood silent around them. Even Eleanor forgot how to breathe. Alexander looked up. Not as a duke. Not as one of England's most respected men. Simply as a man offering his heart. Lady Eleanor Ashford. His voice carried warmth and certainty. You have taught me that dignity can survive cruelty and that kindness can survive sorrow. Her hands trembled. I cannot promise a life without hardship. He smiled softly. But I can promise that you will never face it alone. Tears blurred her vision. Alexander extended his hand. Will you marry me? For a moment, the frightened orphan she once was tried to answer. The girl who expected rejection. The girl who believed she was unwanted. The girl eating leftovers in silence. Then that girl slowly released her hold. In her place stood a woman who finally understood her own worth. A woman who had survived. A woman who was loved. Eleanor laughed through her tears. The sound was bright and beautiful beneath the moonlight. Yes. The single word changed everything. Joy illuminated Alexander's face. He rose and gently took her hands. Neither spoke for several moments. Words felt unnecessary. The future stretched before them like dawn after a long night. Months later, wedding bells echoed across the estate chapel. The same halls that once witnessed Eleanor's humiliation now celebrated her happiness. Guests traveled from across the country to attend the ceremony. Those who had once whispered behind fans now offered sincere congratulations. The servants who had pitied her stood proudly among the gathered crowd. As Eleanor walked down the aisle, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, bathing the chapel in colors of gold and sapphire. Alexander waited at the altar. Their eyes met. Nothing else mattered. Not titles. not scandals, not the years they had lost, only the life they were beginning together. Years later, visitors would admire Ashford Estate and speak of its beauty. They would praise its gardens, its architecture, and its history. Few would know the story that mattered most. The greatest treasure within those walls was not land, wealth, or influence. It was a forgotten young woman who once sat alone eating leftovers while the world looked away, and a man who chose to notice her. Because sometimes a life changes not through grand power or fortune, but through a single act of kindness. And sometimes the smallest cry for help becomes the first line of a great love story. At the window of the estate's brightest room, long after the candles of the wedding had burned low, Alexander and Eleanor stood hand in hand, watching moonlight settle across the gardens below. No longer invisible, no longer unwanted, and never alone again.